Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles, and welcome to Family Office TV. I'm also the founder and CEO at SFO Continuity, a private membership organization dedicated to family offices, and of course, my educational platform at Family Office Masterclass. And many of you, since we have new people come on all the time, may know me from the past, the longtime founder. Well, you're always the founder, but founder and longtime CEO at Family Office Association. I sold my interest earlier this year in 2023. And for context of this discussion, if you hear this way in the future, we're early December of 2023. The weather's getting cold. I am off to Austria, so it'll be a lot of fun. And we have an incredible program today, which is among the most common requests that I get that I'm active in, but surprisingly really haven't done much in terms of my Family Office TV programming. And that would simply be technology solutions for family offices. Now, to give a little bit of context to it, what I do in terms of for technology for family offices in this session is going to have a wonderful guest and is going to be relatively broad in terms of what we're going to cover. I've known our special guest today for a long time, and he's one of the top people that is in this community and industry for technology. We will have him back in 2024 multiple times where we'll do deeper specific dives. But today's conversation on technology solutions for family offices is going to be a little bit more broad. And that special guest, I might add, is Michael Perez, Managing Director of the Family Office Practice at F2. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Angelo, and good morning. Great to be here.
Excellent. Thank you. And again, for a little bit of context, I've been in this community for 2 decades. This is absolutely Angelo's big three. Don't forget, our people, technology, and systems. So technology, among the dozens of things I could have picked, I think has really moved up the ranks to number 2. I don't think in the foreseeable future, we'll see what happens with AI in 10 or 20 years, it's going to replace people, but the people have to utilize the technology. So this is all incredibly important to having an effective, and I would argue an efficient family office. And Michael has been in this community for decades, both in wealth management and in technology. And he legitimately is one of the best people I know. And I'm so happy to have met him a while back and to introduce him to my audience. Michael, let's broadly talk a little bit, just big picture speaking to begin with. I remember coming into this community 20 years ago. The options for technology services were very, very limited. And then we had the rise of companies, I would say about 15 years ago. It got stronger 10 years ago, but definitely during COVID, a lot of wonderful entrepreneurs got into the business, and this has created more and more companies that are active broadly in the technology services community for family offices. For the most part, 90% of it, it's good. It creates better quality, creates more competition, and drives down prices. So if you have a legacy technology platform that may be decent, I understand that, but it may be dated and it may be too expensive. So it's an opportunity, even if you have existing services, to review what you have. What's the negative? Only negative is there's so many companies that are doing it that it does create a bit of a smorgasbord, and no family office is going to be able to do diligence on every company. But henceforth, that's why we're doing today's audio podcast, etc., and why we have you on. Talk a little bit about how the community of technology and family offices has changed, especially really during COVID and now.
Sure, great points, Angelo, you made as well. You know, we've really seen what I would call unparalleled digital acceleration and transformation in the family office space. And I think the real catalyst was the pandemic, right? It kind of forced us to work differently, right, in this hybrid mode. And it really introduced a lot of different players to the space. You had mentioned some legacy folks that have been out there a while, maybe haven't been challenged, right? And we have a lot of players. You know, part of my role as a managing director of the family office practice is to do this perpetual due diligence on vendors. And, you know, I have a growing list, about 95 or so vendors, you know, that kind of fall in the family office space, very diverse services. And it's really making the competition out there really appealing for clients. However, you know, with that, it becomes a very daunting task to really evaluate this, and the vendor selection process and the implementation can be quite challenging for families. And a lot of clients come to me and they're, Mike, where do I start? Right. And there's a lot there to do it. We can help with that. We'll kind of guide you through that. In a lot of cases, help pre-qualify some of that depending on your needs and requirements.
Of course. And again, we're going to keep this discussion more broad. Yes, I do admit that probably aggregation and reporting is going to be somewhat the lead, but we're going to build into that. And we will do separate programs on all of this because it is very important heading into 2024. So I probably start with pretty simple and straightforward, yet ironically, most families don't even have it. And by families, meaning the family of wealth in their family office, what I would simply call a private family portal. You have companies like Way to Be One, Sumitas, Trusted Family, and I'm sure there's others. Those are just three that popped in the top of my mind. Maybe without going granular into any one of them, broadly, why is that kind of service potentially important for families, the family offices, and perhaps the advisors as well?
Sure. You did mention a couple of players there that I'm familiar with. I might add another one in that list too. Paladine. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Angelo.
I am, sure, Joe.
Yeah, I think it gives the families the ability to really collaborate and manage in a very secure environment. And it also allows some of the third parties that need to interact with families get access and entitlements to some data, but only the data they need. So, these tools typically complement some of the other, nuts and bolts types of applications around the partnership accounting, the GL, investment management, the portfolio, but nonetheless have a very important role in the overall family office landscape.
Of course, of course. And again, we could do deeper dives and even showcase in future opportunities, podcast programs with Michael to pull up some of the programs and show you kind of a little bit of how they work and how it could be enticing. It's an opportunity for families to communicate kind of intra-family and who and what to include with their advisors, their family office, a place to store certain documents and interact. So they are valuable and probably underutilized. I guess I could also throw in group messaging. Most people would probably think of potentially Slack. That is something that, again, most family offices are probably not utilizing, but it's a way to potentially become more tech savvy, which that really doesn't matter, but becoming more effective and more efficient does.
Sure.
We could even probably in the future go into things like social media platforms and how families could utilize that. Even certain virtual meeting platforms, which Lord knows since COVID have really had an opportunity in terms of taking off lately. But I do want to maybe have just a pinch of focus. I'm always surprised that many family offices, I think, are kind of weak on what I would define as their CRM. And that is important. That does lead a little bit to having processes and systems, because you want to know in finance and legal and accounting and really everything, household management, who's doing what and how is that person, do we have all their contact info? What happens if our lead liaison quits, goes down, or gets disabled? Could we pick up the slack? How do we reach out to this person? It's very cost effective, yet somehow I feel that many family offices are kind of weak on their CRM.
I would agree, Angelo, as well. I just wanted to touch on the collaboration portals before we leave that completely. What I've seen there is a real advance in the security around those, right? So it's very secure, golden source type of data, which now the families have an opportunity to have that data protected in a very secure environment. Whereas in the past, we had a lot of folks kind of using independent email, kind of outside of the system. So just wanted to mention that too, that the security there is really advanced, right? Cybersecurity risk assessments on everybody's tip of their tongue. So I did want to include that. But back to CRMs, there's quite a few out there, a lot of different options, Salesforce probably being one of the favorite out there. What I'd like to mention with that too, which I think is beneficial, I'm seeing a big push too, they really come with workflow that can really assist the family with other activities in the firm as well, right? So not just using it in the traditional CRM fashion, but actually leveraging some of the workflow capabilities in that as well. And I think that's a big advance there too. That's come real far in the last 6-7 years. We see a real big push on that. A lot of energy and dedication put into the workflow capabilities of the CRMs, which I think is a benefit And my clients, when we put technology solutions in front of them, Angelo, quite frankly, we try to solve for more than one thing, right? And a lot of these tools and applications and solution sets that are out there now are offering just kind of more than just what's on the face value, right? So part of our job is to really go in there and do that due diligence and pre-qualify that for our clients and try to get the best solution, the most value that we can out of technology.
Of course, and that does make a lot of sense. I'll probably throw in another category that we could do a deeper overview in the future. Some people call it task management, some people call it project management. I am the biggest advocate of that sort of technological service. Could you only imagine running a family office, being the leader, having people under you in investing in tax and legal and household management, whatever it might be? Everyone needs a goal, correct? Especially newer employees need to be onboarded and have a process, have a game plan. What is their goal? But how are you measuring how they're doing against their goal if they're not updating their progress and you're not checking in, especially in today's more remote world and more geographically diverse? If you're a family office and you're not utilizing project management, even something that may be simple and relatively free like Trello, like, I think you're kind of crazy. Maybe I'm getting a little overboard on this. Maybe I'm getting a little too tech and modern. I am telling you, the most successful single family offices are very, very good on project management. People know what their goals are. They know they have to update. And there's a sense of managerial and leadership. I don't mean that heavy-handed and top-down, although for newer employees that need training, sometimes it does need to be a little bit the case. But the opportunity of knowing the success and tracking a goal, I mean, Michael, to me, that really comes, and that's maybe my strength, that comes down to best practices in a single family office.
I would wholeheartedly agree, and I see more and more clients doing that, using products like Monday.com, right, to do that. And I think another facet that's important, I get a lot of inquiries around this, is the succession planning of the family office employees, right, the staff, the folks that are in that office running the day to day. This kind of gives them a natural kind of, you touched on it too, training, right? So there's a way to pass that knowledge through. I get a lot of requests. My office manager for the last 13 years has left me. I don't know. Were they doing best practices? I have no idea, right? And because they didn't have tools like this in place. Exactly. They didn't have tools like this in place, right? So agree wholeheartedly. Definitely a tool to leverage and take advantage of.
And I would say almost every family office, I mean, in today's world with the cloud, in terms of keeping documents and easily sharing. And that's another discussion that perhaps in the future we could have, maybe even a bordering on debate between the cloud or no cloud. Now, having no cloud in today's world almost seems ludicrous and seems crazy. But if you're an uber private family, there are certain risks in the cloud, and potentially setting up your own offshore server and nuances around that, it would be wickedly expensive. And I have a hard time questioning whether it would make sense. But for a tiny percentage of families, that extra layer might be important. Again, I'm a big mitigating risk guy. I mean, come on, you're talking to a person that basically does a 30-hour masterclass on sovereign risk and disaster preparedness. So I do think of what could go wrong, but we'll save that one for a different time. But broadly, cloud document storage systems, whether it's Google, Box, Dropbox, I'm assuming that's pretty integral to helping to set up the full picture of the technology spectrum that you work on as well.
Sure, it is, in fact, and I see a lot of clients leaning towards a product called Net Documents, and a lot of the other platforms too. And I mentioned earlier in the conversation, we try to solve for more than one solution where we can, where it makes sense, where integration, is simple and intuitive. A lot of times, the other products will have a proprietary DMS or document management, system within it, which can be leveraged as well too. So, we make sure we look at that too holistically, right? What makes the most sense, right? Some solutions, we can get more than one, requirement fulfilled. Great. If not, there are good products that work together very well and very seamlessly. Again, it's all about the requirements, a big focus on the client's requirements. What do you need to run the business today and then going forward? And I kind of put them in a bucket. I refer to them as the gateway requirements. To me, those are very important. I need to get to those very quickly for my clients to help them make good decisions.
And a little bit of a rise the last couple of years, and I find it intriguing since I do believe that transferring wealth, estate planning is underrated for families of great wealth. They don't know what they don't know. They don't even know if their advisors are really going to be truly best in class. But having an opportunity to develop a proper estate plan and having it somewhat visual, graphic, organized, and structured in a technology platform that makes it easy for the family office to understand what's going on. And it may be also for philanthropic initiatives. It may be dedicated to the variety of FLPs, limited partnerships, and trusts that they have, and integrating that with the family members, the family office, and the advisors. This gets to be a little more complex than people think. So kudos the last couple of years to the rise of companies like Luminary and Vanilla, if you wanted to talk a little bit about those kind of softwares and how they're very valuable to a family.
Sure. Yeah, that's kind of one of the, I look at trends over the past year, and I had a lot of folks in particular kind of reaching out around philanthropic needs, right? And what they're doing. And, the software that's been out there or the technology solution sets haven't really addressed that too well. So I think there's still a lot of room in that area, Angelo, for improvement there. And, I get more and more requests about that. And quite frankly, there's not a lot of players. You mentioned a couple. But there's really not a lot of players in that space. So I think there's some real room for growth there.
For sure. And you're even starting to see a rise of companies that kind of tie a little bit of that all together and really everything and kind of planning out a variety of important integral information to the family, especially if they're larger and more geographically diverse. And I mean, I know some families that literally file because of a variety of LLCs, limited partnerships, trust, and all that, literally hundreds, and I'm talking 400 to 500 tax returns a year. So that is a lot of stuff. So there's companies like Leaf Planner and others that kind of help to organize, for lack of a better word, the complexity of a lot of people's life. Have you looked a little bit into programs like that?
I haven't this past year. I've focused in a couple of different areas. So I have not, Angelo, to be honest.
Very intriguing stuff. And again, this is all so fast evolving, really. Again, like COVID changed. What was likely going to happen in time was basically accelerated by probably 2 or 3x relative during COVID with entrepreneurship, with technologies and things that I noted. So there's kind of something technology wise for probably everything. Now, before we get into some of the nuts and bolts like bill pay, accounting, aggregation, reporting, we already went a little round robin about 6 or 7 different things that may leave, even though we're going briefly, without a lot of detail, some people's heads spinning. If I'm an executive in a family office in a leadership role, sometimes that's called CEO, maybe called president, maybe called executive director, may simply sometimes I've even seen be called managing director. No matter what it's called, this is going to sound a little intimidating, technology, especially if they're a little bit older. But I think, and let me know if I'm wrong, and I wouldn't say that I'm natural and intuitive to technology, but everything we covered so far, it's going to get a little more complicated in aggregation and reporting. But everything we covered so far is pretty straightforward. I think with a little bit of training, a little bit of guidance, you could log on to these programs, you could get comfortable and familiar with them, and it will absolutely, I promise you, it will make the family office. I kind of am less concerned about efficient, although I think that has some merit. What really matters, as the great Peter Drucker would speak about, is effective. I believe with confidence it would make you more effective. Would you say that the training, working with the senior executive to not necessarily be an expert, but be well-rounded enough to understand the nuances of the systems and to log in, what we covered so far is not that complicated?
I would agree for the most part, Angelo, but I would say typically at that level, we're having folks that are not so interacting with platforms per se, right? So when you talk about, efficiency, I'm really talking about the core teams that are supporting the family, right? So again, I would say most of the systems that we have out there are pretty intuitive. A lot of the vendors supply really good training. I think the biggest challenges that I see with these, once they're kind of up and running, kind of going beyond or trying to get more value out of it, reporting or configuring the systems to do maybe special needs or things that pop up, can be challenging for clients. So initially, I would say probably intuitive. You'll probably see some, direct efficiencies coming out of that. But long term and kind of supporting them, I see that as challenging for some of my clients, going forward.
You're not incorrect. And again, you're going to be the expert who goes in on someone that I would maybe bring in with me relative to the technology expert. My expertise is going to be more broadly on operations and best practices and tying in governance and the importance to the family and all that. So from my perspective, the opportunity of being fluid enough in the technology is like, what happens if someone goes down? You don't want one person to hold all the keys. As the leader of the family office or somewhere in that vicinity, I think it's important that you can basically step into practically anything and at least have it be functional. And what is the succession plan if something were to happen to a person that gets plucked away, that gets fired, that leaves, or simply if they're doing it, but you don't have a way of gauging their success at it? How do you simply know if they're really good, if they're competent? So I'm going to put a little extra pressure on the senior level executive. Kind of the buck's going to, well, the buck always stops with the family. It's the family's responsibility to hold it to a high standard. But at the end of the day as well, for the person most representing them, the senior executive, you do owe it to be able to be fluid in the effectiveness and efficiency and a level of succession and processes and policy and procedures and steps. If someone or something goes down, that someone could step up. And you gauging the quality of the person in your family office that's working on it, either that person's going to need to be trained better, or maybe you need a new person, but you're going to have to take a leadership position and sometimes make tough decisions. Now, again, I'll take off my best practices hat there for a second, but that's my little bit of scolding to some family offices and families.
And you're spot on, right? So, I really encourage my clients, we can put the best technology solution set into your shop. If you don't embrace it with training, you don't embrace it with good, robust policies and procedures, right? We talked about succession planning here, right? For internal folks, you're not going to get the value out of that. You just won't, right? And one of the biggest weaknesses I see with my clients is there's really typically an absence of very formal policies and procedures, right? And that really marginalizes the effectiveness of the technology solution that you may put in. So, we kind of come in and it's really about operations, reporting, and technology, right? When we come and make recommendations, technology alone won't solve it. So we really kind of put out recommendations to address these things. And a lot of our clients are very willing to do that, right? To put that extra energy in to do that. And it protects them, internally, right? To your point, right? The buck stops at the top, right? We need to have the underlying infrastructure, not just the technology, right? To make it all work cohesively, more efficiently, more scalable, right? So you hit right on it, Angelo. Yeah.
In terms, even something like bill pay. Now, of course, there happens to be a company called bill.com. I think they're still around. They're relatively simple and straightforward. And some of the platforms that are more all-inclusive, we're going to get to them a little later, could also weave in bill pay. And why I'm going to lump in bill pay with some accounting, which could also be weaved into some all-inclusive platforms that we'll get to. But now you'll have companies like Intuit QuickBooks. You'll have more comprehensive platforms like Sage Intact, Elias, if I'm pronouncing them correctly, and there's others. If you could give a little context to the importance of that service, whether you want to define it as accounting / bill pay from a technological solution to a family office.
Yeah, I think, Angelo, it's kind of a case by client, right? Their size, the model, their business model, their operating model. You had mentioned a couple of different ones too. I see a lot where it's kind of done in all in one. I don't really like that term all in one because I'm not sure the all in one platforms actually do all in one. But there are out there that are kind of the leaders out there, they typically include a bill paying service in that as well, right? So that's kind of bundled in there. That's kind of included in those services. And then there's others that you had mentioned too, kind of smaller, maybe fit the particular niche of that client. They work well too. I see a big trend. It just keeps, trending this way, year after year. If we can kind of take that outside of, our purview and put that off to a third party. So I see a lot of folks using it a little different capacities, Angelo, quite frankly, from just a specific service. You had mentioned bill pay, to some of the bigger platforms like SEI's Archway includes that, Eaton Solutions, right? There's quite a few out there that'll offer that as a service. I kind of like it as a service. I can get more value out of my platform or my technology selection. Hey, good for me, right?
Of course, that's it. And to me, this is an integral service. You have to have something like this. If you're a significant family, multiple interest, and you have a family office, one of the most important things they're doing, it's obviously going to be investing, accounting, and in my opinion, wealth transfer and all that. That all weaves in to getting it right from the perspective on the accounting side. Right. You also have some amazing technological solutions for all my wonderful investors out there, whether as an LP interest to a degree, whether a direct investor, whether they're simply active internally, perhaps in public companies or whatever it may be that they're investing in, that could give you greater analytics. Perhaps you want to talk about some companies like Arch, Burgess, Novus, etc.
Sure. Yeah. One of the big trends, this past year, kind of really seen my clients, I'll call it, kind of doubling down on the private investments, right? The private assets, the alternatives, right? The uniques, the specialty, whatever you want to refer to them as. And there are players out there that have really kind of added a combination of optical reading, AI, and really kind of helping out that whole process, right? That kind of mystique that's been out there or been typically, historically managed on a spreadsheet, right? So we have players out there like Arch, and there's Canoe and Alchemy, even a company called Legex that can help with that. And they really look at this holistically, right? From the administration of the private asset, right? The private investment, the subscription agreements, the valuations, the capital calls, and kind of do a lot of this work for you and bring it into a centralized place for you to then do further processing or reporting on. Huge lift in that area, right? Leveraging technology where it makes a lot of sense. This past year, we were fortunate enough to make a recommendation, worked on two of them with Arch this year, and dramatically increased efficiency, reduced work and activities that we had senior people doing on spreadsheets. In one particular example, there was over 1,500 private investments that an individual in the firm was doing manually on a spreadsheet. So
that's a busy person. Do they still have a job now? I don't know if they're
they do now. They're the liaison to the vendor, right? And they are also now really shifted to more oversight and client relationship type of value add services. So it worked out really well. Yeah.
And that would be a service, I believe, of Arch, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, for those families that are active direct investors, Arch, and there's others, and again, more and more competition will come in. And this goes to what I kind of maybe hinted at earlier, especially the last couple of years since COVID. The technological landscape has drastically changed. It is way, way more players, more complex, but more opportunities for better services and driving down the pricing of, I would call it maybe existing legacy players. Some of them arguably have gotten a little bit bureaucratic and have fallen behind. So a company like Arch, who I have spoken to as well, is very, very interesting in terms of what they're doing. But to just randomly not have someone like Michael as an intermediary to understand the needs of your family office from a technological perspective, and then to weigh those options with technological solutions and which one. I mean, I spoke about this a million times. You may end up, why buy a Lamborghini type solution that is glitzy, that is difficult to use and expensive, when you may not even have the internal resources or the people that are going to know how to ride or drive that Lamborghini. And by the way, it may not even make sense. You may be better off with a model car that is not as glitzy and fancy, but gets the job done, is easier to use, more effective for your purpose, and also saves money. Like, it makes no sense. Don't just randomly spend on the most complex, glitzy technology that you're probably not going to be able to maximize anyway. Do you find that to be the case in a lot of family offices when you go in there, Michael?
Yeah, I do, in fact, and it's kind of, I'll call it the shiny new toy syndrome, right? They see something out there that maybe some peers had used or had mentioned to them, and they kind of go all in on something like that, and they bring it into the shop. And I can talk to examples of they brought in a sophisticated portfolio management investment analytical tool without mentioning any names, and they brought it in the shop, and this is going to be great. It's going to help us with all our analytics, our reporting, etc. And the 3-year contract was signed. They're into year 2, and they haven't used it or put it in production, right? Just for
Oh
that
my
reason,
God.
it was overwhelming, right? It was too
All too
much.
common, sadly.
Yeah, so that is a common, kind of scenario that we have too. What I urge the clients is, right, and Angela, you talk to it too quite a bit, right? I have maybe a different, stand on it, right? I talk about operations reporting and technology. Really, to get a baseline, we an assessment of that really should be done, and then from there you draw out a couple of different things, kind of your technology infrastructure blueprint, if you will. And again, I'll refer to these gateway requirements, and you really have the understanding of kind of where you are right now. And I also like to hear from the executives too. Do you have any strategic plans? Are you looking to acquire or stand up a business, etc.? All these kind of factors there, and really do a very strategic picture, and then apply the technology to it. And again, it's more than just technology. I emphasize it's got to be a commitment to the operations piece of it, to the policies, the procedures, and all that, to come up with this new operating model. So that is a common occurrence, and we always don't need the Ferrari or the Bugatti, right? Sometimes we can do pretty well with a Porsche or a Cadillac. Will do just fine. So yeah, it really depends on the client and what their needs are, but that is a common occurrence. We see it a lot, and then it's kind of like buyer's, remorse.
You
Right?
really brought it up there, Michael. I'm going with the multi-$100,000 Lamborghini, and you popped me up to $5 million for the Bugatti. So you're really a high-level guy. I really like that. And by the way, for those that are a little newer to technology, I know there's somewhat similar names, but they're completely different companies. We'll get to Archway in a little while, but Arch that I mentioned, or technically Arch Labs, is a completely different company. There also are companies that really do good X-ray-like services looking in, maybe Burgess, if you wanted to get a little context in terms of what they do.
Yeah, it's been a while since I worked with them directly. They're kind of one of the 95 on my list. I remember in particular a client. So we're talking a lot of technology here, right, as well. But a lot of with that technology comes service solutions too, right? So the context I had, recently with Burgess is they were kind of using it in an outsourcing of funds administration and leveraging the platform, internally to support that business. But they're certainly a player that's been in the space for a while, very reputable. And I believe they have a newer product offering. I want to say it's on the tip of my tongue. I won't mention it here, but they offered a kind of a newer, more intuitive UI to the product, a little better reporting. So they're definitely making advances with that product. And again, it goes back to that perpetual due diligence on the vendors in the space. It's an arduous task to keep current.
Right. And I would say rather bluntly, no matter what kind of family office you are, you cannot do this effectively internally. You really do need to have, I mean, I guess in theory, if you made Michael a good enough offer, who knows, maybe you could bring someone like him internal. But I would even argue, let's assume you were to potentially do that, you're missing out on his opportunity of him meeting with other comparative families, getting feedback of what's working, what's not working for them, having a level of independence, and having a level, and this is the same thing of bringing the world's greatest estate planning attorney internal to your family office. It sounds good on the surface. I'm not saying it's not a good idea, but you're taking that person away from other billionaires, that the work he does with you is also a collective of the wisdom that he picks up from the other people, even more wealthy than you with more complex situations, and the resources that he or she has at that organization. And now you're siloing them. So someone like Michael comes into your family office and really does the analysis, does the evaluation, has the expertise of spending 12, 14 hours a day talking to these 94 plus companies that he has. It really, trust me, maybe 10 years ago, you might have been able to do a portion of this quasi internal if you were somewhat good at it. That is out the window. It's gone. You can't. I've been in 2,000 family offices. I know what it's like. Accept the fact that you need some help and resources to become more effective and become more efficient. Talk a little bit about a company that I believe came to rise maybe 5 years ago, and I think quite an interesting force in the community, Canoe.
Sure. So yeah, Canoe, I mentioned them earlier kind of in the context with Alchemy and Arch. Definitely have taken technology to the next level, really kind of integrating AI, which we should touch on AI briefly here at some point too, Angelo. I guess probably what resonates with me the most with Canoe is the cost efficiency of putting solution sets in, the customization that's easily attainable by applying their applications internally. Just really, especially what resonates with me is in the private investment space in particular with Canoe. So definitely a player to look at.
Yeah, they've gotten very competitive in terms of their capability. I think pricing wise, relative to certain competitors, I think they're also going to be, again, it's all relative, but relatively attractive.
Yes.
I guess segueing a little bit into kind of a little bit of the meat and potatoes would broadly be aggregation and reporting. Where it gets a little complicated is some of them do GL, general ledger, some of them don't. So that's an additional service. Debatable whether some of them do it well. So just because they may have it doesn't mean they're good at it. You'll have to hire Michael and make your own decisions on that. We're not going to go into great granular detail who may be better and who's not. And some of that is going to be relative to what your needs are and your capability of utilizing the system as well. But what I'm basically saying is sometimes it is better to bifurcate the systems. However, there are also some intriguing programs that do offer for certain people intriguing, let's broadly go with the term, all-in-one solutions. So when I think of aggregation and reporting, there's some players out there that have been around a long time. I could think of SS&C. I could think of Adipar. Even Legex has been around a fair amount. Citco, of course, SEI Archway.
Right.
And I could go on. Black Diamond, Mastro, and others. But if you could talk a little bit about broadly, for those that may be just creating an SFO, why don't we even, although I think it's self-explanatory, aggregation and reporting, and why most families don't even have a specific service. So what's the advantage of having a technological solution like among those I noted?
Sure, it's a good question. You kind of did a really good job of pre-qualifying, right? It kind of depends on the client's needs, the requirements, the size and scale. There are a lot of different options. I would include Rocket Solutions in there too as kind of a really
100%.
solid all-in-one player. Which they're actually, I believe, going through a rebranding of the product. I believe it'll be, if I'm correct here, the FiTech Family Office Solution. So that's one in particular I'm working with several clients. When we speak of all-in-one, I kind of, say it sarcastically almost in times because in fact a lot are not really all-in-one, right? It depends on where you challenge them. Again, the gateway requirements of what your firm is doing or what their needs are really helps determine that. A lot of different players in that space, a lot of different price points on that. A lot, and part of my success, Angelo, quite frankly, was being agnostic, right? I work as an advocate for my clients and I'm agnostic to the vendors in the space because I do have opportunities to work with all of them.
Let's be very clear there, Michael, so my audience understands that, because that was very important what you said. You are getting paid by the family / SFO. You're not getting a reimbursement from the underlying company or a commission. You're completely independent.
That is correct. And I've been kind of operating this way for the past 25 years. Again, really as an advocate for my clients. And I use the word vendor and product agnostic, right? Because I typically have worked in one capacity or another with all of these players in the space. And there's pros and cons for all of them, and some fit perfect for some clients, some don't. It depends. But back to your all-in-one solution, quite a variety there. They all do things a little bit differently, delivering the same, solution sets, if you will. I'm getting tongue-tied on words here a bit. All different price points, and again, some do things better than others, so it depends, right? And I'm an advocate too of looking at not just only all-in-one solutions, but sometimes there's a case where maybe I can put together two different solution sets that'll work optimally for the clients as well. Aggregation, right? There's players that leverage some of the pure aggregation firms like PCR, and it's kind of embedded within their platform. When I get in and do my due diligence for my clients, I dig in there. I want to know, okay, when my client signs a 3-year or 5-year agreement to work with you, I want to make sure they have one throat to choke. I'm not talking to people at PCR. I'm not talking to, I want to go to one place, right? The service level agreement has to be favorable for my clients. So there's an emphasis on that as well. There's a lot of different players. And I have some clients that have a pretty significant IT component in their organization, and they can take on and do aggregation on their own and pass data around. It depends. And others kind of need that full turnkey solution, right? So it depends again, Angela, and you touched on it. What my clients are looking for, what are their requirements will help define that.
Yes, and so I don't get people that I've met in the industry mad at me. By the way, there's literally hundreds. Michael, who lives and breathes this, does deep dives on 94, and that's probably growing. But there are definitely other organizations that do either aggregation reporting and or GL that have either newer or been around and are wonderful, but it's all relative. So some of those that I didn't mention are FundCount, Eaton, who's been around a long time, and Eaton Solutions is certainly a very viable and very intriguing platform in Europe. You have SRL Global, and maybe from some relatively newer companies like AssetVantage and others. So again, I'm not mentioning everyone. Sorry if I left some out. I'm going to be doing much, much, much more on technology because it's so important in 2024. So stay tuned. But I think that since we did open up the door to a little bit of this is a core service, I do think we have to dive a little bit deeper. Like, for instance, Adapar is a very well-known program, incredibly powerful and robust, does not do GL, correct me if I'm wrong. So it's not going to be the all-in-one solution. And then you have, a standard, wonderful organization, an SCI Archway, that does aggregation reporting in GL. But again, this goes to, it's all relative. What are you looking for? What is the capability of your team? How could they be trained? And it's not going to be the platform that we're going to do it now, but some companies that do all in one, they're kind of pretty good on one and kind of weak on the other. It's not too many that are just crushing it on we're great and easy to use, wink, wink, aggregation reporting and GL. I don't know if there is any such thing, but I admit with the advances in technology, they're all getting better and better.
I would agree, Angela. I think they're trying to close the gap a lot on that as well, but you're spot on with that. Some do things better than others. For example, again, I'll go back to the requirements. I know we're talking technology, but the requirements are important, right? If I'm doing partnership accounting, I have tax preparation and processing requirements. I have a huge universe of alternative assets, and I have principal and income reporting needs. That kind of whittles my choice down of those all-in-one players pretty quickly, right? And these are the things, again, I stress with my clients, right? Let's understand the operating model, all the nuances, or even maybe what I plan on doing in the future, right? All these things come into play when we help and set up, due diligence exercises on vendors.
And if I had it's going to put you maybe a little bit in a tough spot. And I know it's going to be on the spot and it's going to depend on nuances, but the audience, they want me to extrapolate something, Michael. So here I go. If I'm, say, a larger scale family office, $1 billion plus, lots of it allocated, I have 30 to 40 LP positions. We have 30 to 40 direct investing positions. We do some internal trading on public equities. We have various LLCs that own 70 real estate positions, like a pretty deep complex family, some multi-currency, some international. What
Mhm.
would be like some of the Uber power platforms that are probably going to cost a lot of money, be a little bit
Sure.
complex, but assuming the family office is willing to be internal or train, what would be some of the platforms in that example of kind of a top 1 or 2% SFO that would potentially be something to look at?
Sure. So top of mind, what I would look at, I always stress to look at three minimum if we can, right? In some cases with very specific requirements, maybe there is not, right? And I'll give you an off the wall kind of example here. ILIT administration, right? So irrevocable life insurance trust, right? Which may come into play in some of the families. Not a lot of players in that space, so we have limited options. However, in the example you gave me, I would look at SEI Archway, I would look at Eaton Solutions, and I would look at Rocket Solutions by Phytech. Those would be my three that I would start with and look there for those
And all
requirements that
those
you
that
gave.
you mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, Rocket, SCI Archway, and Eaton do inclusive GL, General Ledger.
From my understanding, yes.
And actually, in Rocket's case, and perhaps the others, it gets pretty deep in terms of for other aspects of principal accounting and things like that.
That is correct. Right.
Now, are these programs going to be the easiest, perhaps, of all the platforms out there? Perhaps not. And again, pricing wise, that could be a different scenario as well.
Sure.
But if you wanted the Bugatti relative to certain situations and perhaps to keep it quasi all inclusive, sure. Now, again, another wonderful country as well, sure. Since I believe they're internationally focused, but a company like Mastro, who's been around a long time, has operations in Europe and Mexico, also does GL, is going to be wickedly good, especially for more global families with currency issues and challenges like that. So again, there is no one perfect company or solution. It
Right.
is some degree of science and a hell of a lot of art. And that's where
Yeah.
it's going to take an expert to kind of come in. Now, how about the opposite of kind of the family example that I gave you? There's going to be way more families that are very successful, maybe has a small virtual family office, maybe they're 150, 200 million, and they're a little bit more straightforward. Angela, we have a couple of real estate interests. We do some internal trading of public equities, and we're an LP in 5 different funds. Relatively straightforward. The platforms that you mentioned would work, but they may be a little bit of overkill and pricing. What would someone, or what are maybe a multiple of companies that someone may like that may want to look at?
Well, I would probably include Adapar in there. I might include, let me see, Adapar would probably be a good choice. Perhaps Knowledger. I don't know if that resonates with you. That might be a good player
Sure.
there. Trying to think who else. I'm trying to get 3 for you. Smaller scale. Well, yeah,
Where
those
do
are
you
the
think
2.
that fund count comes into that?
It could. Yeah, that could be a contender. Yeah.
And the company
Again,
that you mentioned before, Legex.
yeah, Legex. Yeah, Legex could be a player there too as well. I would agree with that thinking. Kind of, think of them as a tier just below that. But I think a really good, solid, all around solution.
Sure.
Again, though, I'd want to understand a little bit, Angelo, some of the current environment, what's going on there. What are they using for a GL now, right? Is it QuickBooks or Quicken? Or do they have Sage Intact? Are they using something called Adirant? What's the accounting platform? That can kind of help shape it too. On the investment and portfolio management side, what are they currently using? Do they, so some of those questions I'd like to get out in front of those as well before I dove into the next level.
And by the way, from my experiences, everyone, Michael is probably the best of the tech consultants that I know of. Unlike me, I know I'm not the most likable chap in the world. Hopefully, I know a thing or two. But Michael is just very warm, and he's going to understand not to be in a rush to come to a solution, to ask questions, and to understand the capability, to some degree, no offense, of your current staff and their capability perhaps of learning and taking on more, or if they're really overburdened and the family's not going to adapt or change or add. Like there's so many, that's why this is probably more art than science. there's so many different nuances. I mean, Michael, you may come across a family. Let's even make them 200 million. Again, they're wealthy and they're like, you know what? We don't really believe too much in investing in others as an LP and alternatives. We own some real estate interests. We own
Sure.
some treasuries, a little bit of bonds. We take care of that internally through our 2 or 3 banking relationships. And we have a little bit of a diversified stock portfolio. That's it. Like, why do they need an ultra high powered aggregation and reporting system? They may not even
Absolutely.
need that at all. Now, they may need accounting and bill pay and other things that technology could provide a solution for. And that's not to say that aggregation and reporting wouldn't be of some value in that scenario, but that is a scenario where you do not need the Bugatti. Like, it's ridiculous. You're probably not going to be able to drive it properly to get the value out of it. You're way overkill on horsepower relative to your needs, and pricing, it's going to be like probably, I don't know, 5x probably what you need to do.
You're exactly spot on. In fact, Angela, taking that to the extreme, I had a client this past year come to me, very similar how you described, and they're like, do I even need to have a family office? Can I just have a tax person, investment person, kind of be done with this whole thing? Right. So that's the extreme, obviously, right? But that you made a solid point, right? Again, kind of going back to those gateway requirements. What do we need to do? What are we looking at on the horizon? And it really helps dictate some of the decisions or some of our recommendations for a future state. I do want to go back just quickly too. You asked me for a couple of different scenarios, and in both of those scenarios, I always encourage my clients and vendor, not so willing all the time, to do a pilot or a proof of concept too, right? Because no client's unique in the way they do things or their expectations and their operating model. So I try to really emphasize that too. And a lot of times with real life use cases, we can flush out a vendor that said they could do something, but they necessarily can't do it. So I think that's very important too. And that's kind of why I always suggest at minimum.
Vendors never do that, Michael. What are you talking
about? Because we want everyone to be happy, right? We want to be mindful of everyone's time, the vendor's time, the client's time, and my time as well, right? So if we can get to it sooner than later, let's do that.
That is for sure. And we're taking it a little bit to the home stretch, maybe 7 or 8 more minutes left. And again, we're doing this relatively broad. We're definitely going to cover technology more in the future. But I did want to have a chance to introduce you to one, our capabilities in terms of what I do and the work that I do with families, which is more centered around best practices, but obviously with people, systems, and technology, or people, technology, and systems. Technology is a very important part. The question I was going to ask you, Michael, was it's one thing to go in there to do your analysis, to assess the current team, and to be able to work with them with what is going to be viable from vendor selection, but there still is going to be a level of education. How do you hold a vendor to a standard of living up to what they say they were going to do, to the quality of the training they're willing to put in with the family office that they're often getting paid for, and then maybe an additional layer of you hand-holding during that process, which may require more of your time and labor, I understand that, but making sure that the decision of who they move forward with is going to be trained properly and going to be integrated and utilized by the family office?
Great question. And we kind of start that very early in the process, where we'll help and negotiate service level agreements on behalf of our clients with the vendor, right? So that includes things like training, that may include kind of a mock environment initially, right, before we go to a production mode. And then we also offer our services too, right? It's more than strategic consulting. You heard me talk about, kind of our phases or our approaches, right? A current state assessment. The second phase would be a future state assessment. A third may be the vendor due diligence, RFI, RFP on behalf of our clients if they choose so, helping with the vendor selection. And that fourth piece, which we're talking about now, is that negotiations and service level agreements on behalf of our clients. We do that with the vendors to ensure that, right? It may come in early on in the process in the a proof of concept or a pilot exercise, but then throughout that contract, we ensure there's training and there's transition and cutover. And we also offer our services too, if our client's willing, kind of stay around post-conversion or post-implementation to get through maybe that first period, that first month, that first quarter, whatever they need for us to do. So yeah, that's very important, right? And the adoption too on the client side. We emphasize we need champions. The stakeholders need to say, okay, this is what we're adopting. This is where we're going. They need to champion that and help us, and we help with the communications with that within the organization. So great
I mean, I would
question.
understand this inside the family office. It's only human nature. But what do you do when you go into a situation? We have, and they mention, and you do an analysis, but we have certain of the solutions, aggregating reporting. We use this company. We use this for GL. We've been using, and I'm making this up, we've been using them for 6 years and they're great. And you're like, well, lots have changed in 6 years. Not only first, let me understand the goals of the family office, what the expectations are, what the principals of the family member want to get in terms of data aggregation, reporting, how it looks like to them. And I know you've gotten comfortable, which is fine, using what you're using. And maybe it is going to be good enough, by the way, but
Hmm.
it's possible things have changed. There's going to be
Sure.
other solutions that may save money, that may be more effective. But admittingly, it's going to require the angst of potentially change. I'm assuming inertia, and it's somewhat understood, plays into a lot of this. Well, maybe you're right. Maybe that other platform is a little cheaper, a little more tech savvy, but we're comfortable using what we're using. Does that happen a lot?
Actually, probably not. Usually, my clients come to me when they have a pain point, right? So something is just caused them so much grief or anxiety. We're doing too many spreadsheets. I gave you an example earlier, right? I have 1,500 alternative assets, and I'm managing them on a spreadsheet, right? So that's a pain point. That's a natural opening to
That's a
come
big
in.
pain point.
Yeah. Now, part of our exercise too, we'll look at everything that's involved in that operating model, right? We talked today about operations, reporting, and technology, but we also look at other things too, right? Any of the custodians or financial advisors maybe that are in play. We look at things like the omnibus versus fully disclosed custody. Does that make sense? Is that the most prudent thing for you? Are you protected in that particular arrangement? So we look at things like that, and we'll challenge and recommend. Ultimately, we're always looking for efficiency and compliance, right? So how can we make you more efficient, more scalable, and compliance as well? Are you in compliance, internal compliance, or if there's any regulatory bodies that are in play too? So we look at those things, Angelo, and then we suggest and recommend, right? And if it's not broken and it's okay, we're not going to force a change just for the sake of change. But in most cases, they're coming to me already with a pain point, and I need a fix here, right? So it's a pretty natural, organic recommendation based on the requirement of the first need.
That is true. The example that I gave, although viable and happens, there's not necessarily the pain point there. There may be better systems, maybe even a
Yeah,
little more cost effective in today's world, but it's not causing a problem. They already are effective in terms of what they're doing. They're not
right.
likely to want to do a change or look at it. You are correct. Now, in today's relatively brief discussion, by the way, there are things that we did have to leave kind of off the table. We just don't have the time.
Sure,
Leveraging and utilization of Microsoft Dynamics and 365 would have been nice to cover.
sure,
Possibly inventories that we did cover with Carol Kaufman at Pinventory. We went a little
sure.
bit into what Josh Cantor and his company does, and I'll probably have him on the show relatively soon as well in terms of the work that he's doing. I could think of household management that we didn't get into, like Nines
Hmm.
Living.
Sure.
And why don't we save a little bit because it's really cool, but the advances that are happening in AI and really advanced tech with companies like Coalition AI. Uh,
Sure.
I mean, they're doing really intriguing work too. So we may leave the audience a little bit on a hook. But if you
Yeah.
wanted to reach out to Michael and learn a little bit more, even about some of the companies I briefly just noted, Michael's going to be very familiar and will definitely also do the diligence on all of them. So again, I'm not saying this is all inclusive. It's a complex subject that 20 years ago was not really that complex. 10 years ago was getting there, but now there's just so much and it's exciting. But
Yes.
it also kind of muddies the water and may look a little complicated from the outside. So, Michael, for those that would like the opportunity to be familiar with you, and let me cue that up just a little bit as a family or family office, even a smaller virtual family office, maybe more so in some ways because technology plays into having a successful virtual family office, you need
Sure.
Michael or someone like him. Technology is just simply too important. And one day when AI gets hyper advanced, I hope not in my lifetime, but who knows, it will probably leap to number one. So the opportunity in terms of understanding your current situation and becoming more effective. And don't worry, it's not quite as hard, I promise. I'm not a kid and not naturally tech savvy, and I learned a lot of this. You could too. But having an opportunity for someone like Michael to come in, it's not a maybe, it's a necessity. Like if you run a family office and you want to get better and you want it to be great and you want to have better output and better decision making on investing and taxes, you and the family office needs this. It's not 20 years ago, it's not 10 years ago. Times have changed. I know a lot of people in this community. Single family offices are my life. Michael Perez is very, very good. For my people, whether it's my members or whether it's even hearing me in a future platform that I distribute it on, you could have an opportunity to reach out to Michael. And I'm not going to, well, yeah, he's going to give you certain things by mentioning my name, SFO continuity, even family office TV. Hey, I heard about you from Angelo. I saw the show. And Michael, why don't I now leave it to you in terms of what my relationships would get in terms of connectivity with you and resources?
Sure. Thank you, Angela. You're too kind, first of all. Yeah, I'd be happy to, offer kind of a no obligation 30-minute discussion, kind of a brief discovery session with the clients. I would also probably extend some of the white papers we've done this year. I think there's two of them. One's on data complexity. Another one, I believe, is on cyber security risk assessment, which I think we kind of failed to mention.
And we didn't even talk
Angela,
about that because that requires probably 2 or 3 hours.
I think that's an important piece too. A lot of demands in the past year are looking back at trends. We performed quite a few assessments for clients as well. I can be reached, Angela, if I could be as forward as putting my email out there and phone number. Does that make sense?
I insist.
I can be reached at michael.perez@f2strategy.com. And a good phone number for me is area code 973-865-4822.
And if you could give the email one more time, Michael.
Sure. It's michael.perez@f2strategy.com.
Is there also a website?
I believe there is too. It should be www.f2strategy.com.
Given your email, that would make sense.
Right.
And great. And that, so that's wonderful. Again, I highly recommend, very kind offer from Michael to give a complimentary assessment. It could be on, I'm assuming, Zoom video. So it could be a little bit more interactive. All you have to do is mention my name specifically, and also some of the white papers that are more proprietary exclusively for relationships to Michael that he's willing to share. I've known him for a long time. He is a go-to person in this community. I highly recommend reaching out. And I just don't understand how you cannot utilize someone like him and have an advent and advocate relative to technology, given it's so important. We just gave it a glance over today. Like he said, maybe among the most important parts, cyber, we just didn't really have a chance to cover. So it's an opportunity for Michael's organization, which is a prominent one in F2, does a lot of work in that as well. So I highly encourage, from my perspective, reaching out a little bit in my close. And I think much of it I already covered. Again, I'm all about single family offices. I'm all about best practices. That is my life. How you create them, how you run them operationally, standard operating procedures. And again, a lot of it's going to come down to the people. So it's people, technology, and systems. And what a surprise. People are definitely an important part of the latter two. You don't have systems without people creating them and certain principles to follow. And you don't have, besides the fact that people create the technology, you don't have the utilization of it if the people are not properly understanding of the benefit and the value it's going to provide both to them in their role and job, to the family office, and the value to the family. This is incredibly important. So have a chance to reach out to me, reach out to Michael. If worst case, you wanted to reach out to me and have me personally connect you with Michael, that would also be fine. No problem. I'm here to be of service to the community. So just simply ask. And again, I think many of you know from my perspective, I'm at angelorobles.com. My email is angelo@angelorobles.com. And for those of you that may see this at a future point, whether it's a week or 2 weeks from now or later, as I'm possibly going to distribute it on my platforms after my members have a chance to digest it. Certainly that's easy enough to do. Make sure to follow me on YouTube, LinkedIn, and other platforms. But I do want to give a little bit of a shout out. My membership group, SFO Continuity, is really the heart. I was doing beta over the last couple of months. We're now officially launching. We are looking for a certain number of quote unquote charter members that get special benefits and definitely special pricing, and the opportunity for the content. My family office playbook and my multiple of masterclasses. We're just at the point now, after I'm back from my trip to Austria, where we'll be beginning to roll them out to members, and other services and value and connectivity and opportunities and discounts and a whole bunch of things within the community. So would certainly feel free, jump in, look at what we're doing, be part of a collective of a community. And the work that I'll be doing as this evolves in the coming weeks and months is going to be very deep and very intellectual. If you're only looking for, I want to go to events and hear bad speakers and meet a whole bunch of mediocre service providers, then I'm the wrong organization for you. It is not built per se on in-person events, although there will be some best practices, in-person roundtables, possibly masterclasses, and occasionally some fun soirees around the Milken Conference in Beverly Hills, the Hamptons this summer, and Art Basel next year, of course. And I like those too. But this is more applicable for best practices, for deep intellectual rigor. How do you structure a family office? How do you revamp it? Family governance issues, best practices. That's where we shine, on the intellectual aspect of making your family fit with family continuity and your family office better, period. So on that note, have an opportunity to reach out. Definitely connect with Michael Perez. Worst case, let me know. Angelo, I don't care about you. Michael sounds awesome, and he is. Please make a connection. I didn't get his info. No problem. Happy to do so. So that's all good. Again, thank you, audience. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate your time and look forward to the next time. Have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you.